Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill will make America more indebted, more unequal, and less green. Here are 4 things to know. The first is that the bill is big, really big. Nearly 1,000 pages of tax cuts, spending reductions, and new outlays for things like the military and the border. Senators have been voting on trillions of dollars in spending with barely any time to check the details and on hardly any sleep. The compressed timeline and lack of transparency makes it easy to slip in extra provisions, which are hard to get rid of once they become law. One big effect of the bill will be to significantly increase America's budget deficit, which is already huge. It's projected to rise by a cumulative $3 trillion over the next decade, mainly because the bill makes permanent some of the temporary tax cuts that President Trump signed into law in 2017 and adds some new ones. It also increases spending on defense, border security, and non-renewable energy production. Some forecasters are optimistic that the tax cuts will push more workers into the job market and incentivize investment. Other modelers are less optimistic. This chart predicts that the bill will initially boost GDP growth, but over a longer period will be a drag on the economy. That's mostly due to higher interest rates. Eventually, the government will need to cut spending and raise taxes. But it looks like Congress and the president won't do that until they're forced to by the bond market. To partly offset all this spending, the bill contains proposed cuts too. Chief among these are cuts to Medicaid and allowing Obamacare premium subsidies to expire. Both programs are relied on by millions of low-income Americans. Nearly 12 million people could lose health insurance over the next decade as a result. The bill will hasten the phasing out of Joe Biden's green energy subsidies, which are now due to end in 2027. This chart shows the projected effect. The amount of clean energy added to the grid by 2035 will be about 1/3 of what it would have been if the energy tax credits were kept. Critics, including Elon Musk, say that by slowing down new generating capacity, it will hurt the economy and delay the development of AI. Donald Trump says his bill will cut spending, spark growth, and put more money in American pockets. That's partly true. Millions will indeed benefit from the extension of personal tax cuts, but they will disproportionately benefit the well-off, and those tax cuts are paired with much smaller spending reductions. It's certainly big, but it is not beautiful. Donald Trump's
For Kimberly Gallagher, the loss of her husband to cancer 6 years ago.
Now that the president has signed his big, beautiful bill into law, here's a closer look at what's in it. It encompasses many of the president's top priorities. So that means increases in funding to defense, border security, energy. It also includes an extension of the president's 2017 tax cuts. So, for instance, there is an increase in the child tax credit up to $2,200. It also includes proposals the president campaigned on, like no taxes on tips and overtime, although those are temporary. And it sets up new savings accounts for newborns to the tune of $1,000. Now, there are a number of cuts in this package as well to help pay for it. That includes cuts to food assistance or SNAP and Medicaid by stipulating new work requirements. Keep in mind that many of these tax provisions are expected to take effect as soon as this year, while those changes to SNAP and Medicaid will be phased in over time.
Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill has now become law. Let's objectively talk about what's in it.
It's a monster bill, over 900 pages, and incredibly controversial, with some Democrats straight up calling it evil, and many conservatives also saying it's terrible.
But supporters say that it's a huge victory, delivering on several of Trump's core campaign promises.
So here are the top 5 most controversial things we see people talking about. First, that millions of people will lose their Medicaid healthcare. It's true that there are significant changes to Medicaid in this bill. The biggest change comes from the new work requirement, which would require Medicaid recipients aged 19 to 64 to regularly file paperwork showing that they're working, volunteering, or attending school at least 80 hours per month, unless they qualify for an exemption like caring for a young child or having a disability.
As a side note, there's now also a similar work requirement to receive federal food assistance. Medicaid recipients will now also face some new out-of-pocket costs, and states will receive less federal funding for Medicaid. Taken together, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that around 8 million people could lose their coverage, mostly due to paperwork or non-compliance. Second, the bill will give ICE a bigger budget than the militaries of most countries. This is generally true. Here's a breakdown of funds allocated to ICE and other border efforts over the next few years.
Overall, estimates place this new budget for immigration control around the size of Canada's entire military budget. Third, the bill will defund Planned Parenthood clinics. So the bill blocks patients from using Medicaid to pay for health care at any clinic that provides abortion, even if the health care they're receiving doesn't involve abortion. This is important because millions of patients visit Planned Parenthood for things like STI treatment, prenatal care, and cancer screening.
But under the bill, because Planned Parenthood provides abortions, Medicaid can't be used to pay for any service there. You can still use private insurance or pay cash, but without payments from Medicaid, an estimated 1 in 3 Planned Parenthood clinics could close.
Fourth, the bill includes new tax cuts that mostly benefit the wealthy. So the most impactful tax provision in this bill actually doesn't do anything new at all. Rather, it extends the former tax cuts that are already existing law, which many argue were tilted towards high-income earners.
The bill also includes some new tax breaks, including no federal tax on trips. Fifth, federal student loans are going to get wrecked. So the bill adds new caps to the amount of federal loans you can take out for graduate and professional school loans, meaning if students need to borrow more than these caps, they'll have to turn to private loans.
Also, Pell Grants must only go to full-time students now, and Biden's income-driven repayment plan
Where y'all from?
with a new, more stringent plan.
So overall, this was a very broad overview.
So before you go on and leave a comment about a nuance that we missed, this bill was longer than the Game of Thrones.
Trump's so-called big beautiful bill has now become law.
Hey, my good cousins, as promised, I'm going to break down the big, beautiful bill. I tell y'all all the time, I read so y'all don't have to. I know it's been a lot of numbers. Some people are confused. And, you know, in the news, they speak in terms sometimes that you just don't understand. So your good cousins are going to try to break it down. This video is going to be 5 minutes, so I hope that I can hold your attention for that long. So, of course, the big, beautiful bill has passed, which means nearly $150 billion is going towards border security. And for anybody, we know we talk about border security, but what does that entail? So border security is supposed to protect us land and air, keeping illegal immigrants out of the United States. It covers the U.S. border, Canada, Mexico, and also coastal waters in Florida all the way to Puerto Rico. They cover between, I think it's 5,525 miles of land and also air. $46.5 billion for the war. Remember, build that wall, build that wall. And the president before Claudia said we're not building a wall, and Claudia said, I'm not building a wall, bitch. You gonna pay for it. If you want it, you're gonna pay for it. And that's exactly what's happening. We are paying for it. $46.5 billion. Where's that money coming from? Your tax dollars, Dookie. $30 billion is going to go to ICE. ICE, you know, ICE. Just keep hearing about that over and over again. So what you're gonna see is more ICE agents going out on the street, grabbing people out of their homes, from their jobs, rounding them up, taking them to detention centers, and sending them back to their respective countries. I did some digging about crime stats for American-born citizens and illegal immigrants, and of course, American citizens' crime rate is astronomically higher than an illegal immigrant. Typically, their only crime is being here illegally and not filing and doing the proper process and having the correct paperwork. All right, 17 billion people will lose their health care, Medicaid. That's what they're going to lose, Medicaid. When they talk about health care, every time they say health care, just think about Medicaid. 5 million in food assistance gone. And when we say food assistance, we're talking about the food pantries. We're also talking about the soup kitchens. We're talking about those supplemental assistance that people rely on, who may get SNAP benefits and they don't get enough. Because y'all seem to be thinking, you know, you have this welfare queen picture in our head, and it's so crazy to me. You have some senior citizens get like $100 a month, $60 a month in SNAP benefits. So to supplement that, they have to go to the food pantries to get food, because it's either their food or their medication. This will affect children, seniors, and y'all good veterans. SNAP benefits. This is a new SNAP requirement. SNAP parents of children ages 7 to 17 must work 80 hours. I don't know if that's a month. That's what I'm assuming, because you can't work 80 hours in a week. In order to qualify for SNAP benefits. What I think we are losing the plot in the movie is some of these parents, y'all think, sitting at home eating Takis, Some of them are taking care of children with severe disabilities, autism, Asperger's, all type of intellectual disability, borderline personality disorder, all type of mental health challenges. And these parents are home taking care of these kids that y'all wanted to be born. But now they got to get up and figure out how they're going to work. If it's a two-parent household, one parent has to work and the other parent does not. But we know we have a lot of single-parent households, and y'all just seem to think that it's minority people who are just single parents, but there are white women and white men who are single parents. Okay? This will not affect you if you're homeless. You don't have a home, but you can get food stamps. Where you gonna cook your food at? But okay. Some veterans, it will not affect pregnant women and people that are over the age of 64. And I want to go back to the parents of children ages 7 to 17. You know, we have a lot of, because I'm in this generation, we have a lot of people that are taking care of their parents. You know, their grandmother was the original, you know, staying with, living with them. We also talk about the nursing homes. So the nursing homes are closing as well. J.D. Vance said, my mom can babysit the kids while I guess you go to work, but my mom got dementia. Alzheimer's, high blood pressure, diabetes. She can't even take care of herself, but my mom gonna watch the children while you go to work. But the good thing is, tips are tax free. That's what, you know, that's something positive. Okay, education. So the Graduate Plus loans are gone. It's capped at $100,000. So when you get your undergrad degree, you can take out so much of loans. You get your graduate degree, you can take out, there's an amount that you can take out for loans, but it's capped at $100K. But we know that's gonna affect the people that are in medical school, our medical doctors. If your parents are not the Rockefellers and have saved up over, well, $200,000-$300,000 for you to go to medical school, that's not happening. Also, the loan forgiveness program, you would have to pay into that program between 20 and 25 years before they consider forgiving your loans. Now it's 30 years. I want to go back to these rural hospitals because some rural hospitals in Louisiana have already started to close. I think Louisiana and Arkansas were affected the most by this. Their hospitals have already started closing. Like I said, I don't know why y'all think these doctors get nurses and all these people getting paid. They get paid through Medicaid. Your private insurance, y'all who have private insurance, I have private insurance. That shit don't cover that. And then also I think people don't understand is when you have private insurance and you're in the hospital, sometimes you can qualify for Medicaid temporarily to supplement some of the things that your health care does not pay for. So you got all these people sitting high in the hole talking about some old private insurance, but some of you hoes was using Medicaid to supplement what your insurance wasn't paying. Baby, the trap just keep on trapping. May the eyes forever be in your face. 800 cousins, as promised, I'm going to break down the big beautiful bill.
If you think that Medicaid is just health insurance paid for by your tax dollars, then you do not fully understand the system yet. So let me break down what that system is and how it could affect things with the recent policy changes. Medicaid is not strictly a federal program. It's not strictly federal health insurance. What it is a joint state and federal program. So there's currently a match, and that's how it works. So like, say a state spends $5, the feds might match that with $10. Maybe they'll double it, maybe they'll triple it. It depends on the state and their arrangement. I will say that red states and poor states depend on this to function. There's currently a verification system in place that is going to get a lot more heavy with administrative burdens, and that now people have to track how many hours people are working if they're on this insurance, right? So they have to work a minimum of hours, and the state has to put in their own funding and use funding to now hire people to track this, which is a lot of dollars because that's a whole different program. So now more Medicaid money is just running into that, just verification. Then the beautiful bill outlaws this matching system completely. So now they've just put forth block grants and they say, this is all the money.
Donald Trump has signed the big beautiful bill. Here's what's in the big beautiful bill. Delivers the largest tax cut in history for middle and working class. Bigger paychecks of $10,000 more in annual take-home pay. No tax on tips. No tax on overtime. No tax on Social Security. No tax on Made in America auto loans. Protects 2 million family farms from punitive double taxation. Permanent increase in the child tax credit, supporting over 40 million families. A vote against this bill is a vote against the largest tax increase in history. It rescinds billions in green new scam funding. restores fiscal sanity, slashing deficits by $2 trillion. Eliminates waste, fraud, and abuse from bloated federal programs. Permanently secures our borders. Deports at least 1 million illegal aliens a year. Makes the largest investment in border security in generation, providing nearly $150 billion. Finishes phase 2 of the border wall. Shifts the cost of adjudication in the immigration system. Hires 10,000 new ICE agents, 5,000 custom officers. Funds the Golden Dome missile system. Delivers the largest Coast Guard upgrade since World War II. Modernizes our military. Ends Biden's war on American energy. Unleashes domestic oil. And it does Medicaid reform. If you're an able-bodied person, you got to work 20 hours a week. Big deal. If you're not able-bodied, you're a pregnant woman, single woman, all that good stuff. You're not. Anybody who really needs Medicaid, you're not going to lose Medicaid. Donald Trump.
No matter who you voted for, the big beautiful bill has just passed the Senate, so here's how it'll affect you. Let's see if you fall under any of these categories. If you're a service-based worker, like a bartender, waiter, hairstylist, who earns tips or works hourly and gets overtime, you can now keep 100% of your earnings without having to pay federal tax on it. This means it'll save you about $1,300 a year or about $100 a month. Nothing too crazy, but better than nothing. Now, if you have kids, the child tax credit went from $2,000 to $2,200. And if you or your parents are retired and get Social Security, you don't have to pay any federal tax on it anymore, which is actually a really great thing. Now, if you're one of the 78 million Americans that are on Medicaid, you're at risk for completely losing your health coverage. This is because $1 trillion is about to be cut, which means you'll have to pay out of pocket for doctor's visits, surgeries, medications, or completely go without them. If you're on food stamps like SNAP, the bill does make it harder for you to qualify. Overall, the cuts to Medicaid and SNAP affect people who make less than $40,000 to $60,000 a year, pregnant women, children, seniors, and people with disabilities. So in conclusion, if you're wondering if this will affect you, basically, if you make less than $50,000 a year, you will actually end up losing money because of tax changes and program cuts. But if you earn more than $155,000 or even millions and billions of dollars, you'll actually see your income grow because of tax breaks and deductions. So which category did you fall under? No matter who you voted for, the big beautiful
America, did you know that your federal tax dollars is going to fund up to 30% of the state of California's state budget? Yes, that is true. It is Sunday, July 6th here on Capitol Hill, where I'm going to break down part 3 of the big beautiful bill for every American, so that you understand exactly what this bill means for you, and you can also see where the Democrats and legacy media are lying. These are not opinions. This is 100% facts based on the actual text of the bill. And I must say first, I'm very excited that we have my Substack up and running finally. If you want more proof, if you want the audits, if you want more dialogue, off here, head to the link in my bio, subscribe to my Substack, and we can talk much more. But let's begin with, if any American tells you they are being removed from Medicaid because of the big beautiful bill, they are lying to you. The big beautiful bill does not remove any American from Medicaid, nor does it reduce funding going to the states. The big beautiful bill has in no way changed the income guidelines for Medicaid eligibility. The same income rules still apply. What has changed is Section 2103 of the big beautiful bill, in which that is what is defined as the able-bodied adult mandate. We discussed that in the last video, and it is simply just a mandate that requires individuals who are able-bodied, which is a very small group of individuals who are receiving Medicaid, to either work, go to school, or volunteer their time up to 20 hours a week in the community. That is the only change to Medicaid for the individual American. And Section 2105A of the big beautiful bill further expands on those individuals who do not fall in this criteria, meaning individuals with disabilities, senior citizens, adults who are able-bodied but have children under the age of 14 years of age, veterans, caregivers, and the list goes on. So no one is being kicked off of Medicaid. Let's be clear. So why are these blue states and these blue state politicians and legacy media claiming that states are losing Medicaid funding, although that's a lie? It's because the big beautiful bill puts measures in place to hold those states accountable and to prevent them from committing fraud against the federal government, aka the American taxpayer, as they've been allowed to do for decades. You see, these states have been able to do something called the provider tax scam. I'll break it down for you. It's very simple. but it costs the American taxpayers billions of dollars. And that is how you, as an American living outside of California, have contributed to up to 30% of California's state budget. So how this happens is a state like California will tax the hospitals and the nursing homes what is called essentially a Medicaid tax or a provider tax. The state then flips that $10,000 and they use that as revenue to go to the federal government saying that they have contributed their fair share to the Medicaid programs in that state. Based upon how the system is set up, the federal government will then match that same $10,000. In most cases, it's a 2-to-1 match. $10,000 becomes $20,000 going from the federal government to the state. The state then quietly reimburses the hospital or provider that they charge that initial $10,000 tax on through backdoor agreements and overinflated Medicaid reimbursement fees. So you have the hospital now that has that same $10,000 back that they gave the state, and you have the state now with an extra $10,000 from the federal government, aka you, the taxpayer, that they can use to fund their state budgets. It happens everywhere. It is called a shell game. The states benefit, the hospitals benefit, the American people lose. Now, I use California as an example because based on the California State Legislative Analyst Office, up to 30% of California's state budget was funded using this method right here. A federal audit showed that the state of New York had $1.5 billion per year of taxpayer money that was wasted on fraudulent billing, as well as fraudulent reimbursements to providers and long-term care facilities. In the state of Illinois, the Government Accountability Office found that Illinois, using this method, swindled over $4 billion from the federal government by overinflating Medicaid payments back to the providers. Now, do you see why the Democrats are crying? Do you see why these states are panicking? So the big beautiful bill puts a halt to this. It absolutely bans provider taxes from being recycled. It requires real dollar state contributions that will be audited by the federal government to make sure that they are not committing this type of fraud in the system. The Medicaid Integrity Office, or the MIO, that is being established under the big beautiful bill will monitor and audit every single state to ensure they are no longer swindling the federal government out of these funds. In section 2125 of the big beautiful bill, it caps the amount of dollars the federal government will match the state's contributions based on actual spending, not on some type of phony accounting tricks. If your state is telling you that they're losing Medicaid funding, ask them, why were you committing fraud against the system? Because that is the only way states are going to lose funding, is if they were committing fraud. So let's recap. No American is losing Medicaid. No states are losing Medicaid funding unless they were committing fraud, at which point they must stop committing said fraud in order to continue to receive those federal dollars matched. What is going away is fraudulent enrollment numbers, phony state budgets, and wasted taxpayer dollars on states' overinflated budgets just so they can go live lavish lifestyles while the rest of us continue to struggle to put food on the table. The big beautiful bill absolutely in no way defunds Medicaid. It cleans it up. It's certain.
With so much political bias in the media from both sides, it's hard to get an objective view of what's actually changing. So I'll try to lay out the full picture as best as I can, with the pros and cons and arguments from both sides. To start, in one sentence, it's cutting taxes, but also cutting welfare benefits. The catch, though, is that since it cuts taxes by $4 trillion, but only cuts welfare by $1 trillion, then we'll have to borrow $3 trillion to make up for the difference. Democrats argue that these tax cuts mostly help the rich, while these welfare cuts only hurt the poor, meaning it's stealing from the poor and giving to the rich, while Republicans argue that they're cutting taxes across the board, not just for the rich, and that the only parts of the welfare they're cutting out are the waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. So what's the truth? Well, let's break this down, starting with a basic overview of how the taxes will get cut so you can know how much money it'll save you personally. The two biggest tax cuts are actually mostly about just keeping the current tax rates in place. For context, in Trump's first term back in 2017, Trump cut taxes across the board for all income groups and for corporations. And he also doubled the standard deduction, which has saved most of us an extra $2,000 a year or so in taxes. Those tax cuts were going to expire at the end of this year, so our taxes were going to go back up to the previous levels. But this new law keeps those tax cuts permanent and raises that standard deduction even further. Now, whether you agreed with those original tax cuts in the first place is another story. Democrats didn't like them because even if everyone got a tax cut, this naturally saved rich people and corporations the most money, since they had the most money to tax. This has led some to argue that these tax cuts were just a way for Trump to give his billionaire and corporate buddies a free handout, while some argue that this made doing business in America more attractive. There's also a lot of talk we hear about things like no tax on tips or an estate tax cut for the rich. But the total dollar impact of these is actually very minimal unless it specifically applies to you. Alright, and what about those welfare benefits that Trump is cutting? Will 17 million people lose healthcare while 50,000 lose their life? Well, not really. These estimates have been spreading around a lot, but if you read how they came up with those numbers, it's kind of deceptive. The actual change is mainly that if you want to receive Medicaid, which is free healthcare for those living in poverty, then you must now work at least 20 hours a week, unless you are disabled or you have young kids. So you will probably like this policy change if you're concerned about freeloaders in the system and you don't want unemployed users chilling there while we pay for their healthcare. But a big counter-argument to this is that if you lose your job, you might now lose all your affordable healthcare options. This is because most Americans either get healthcare covered by the employer or by a program like Medicaid. Well, if you get fired now, you lose both. So you'll now have to either A, pay full price for private health insurance, which is several $100s, or B, just pay out of pocket for hospital bills that could be tens of thousands of dollars. And the irony is that when you're fired and don't have income, well, that's when you're least able to afford either option. Food stamps are also getting hit with a similar change where you have to work now to get them. So there are similar pros and cons. These are the largest changes, but there are a lot more policies in this new 870-page law as well, like no more clean energy tax credits, more military spending, more mass deportation funding, less generous student loan terms, and a higher child tax credit. So if you combine it all together, it basically means that the lowest income earners may get poorer if they lose their welfare benefits from being unemployed. But if you're at least in the middle class, then you will get several $1,000s a year richer from the tax cuts. But we have to talk about the catch, which is the $3 trillion to borrow to make this happen, which could be a big deal because we already have so much debt now that the interest payments we make on it alone in the red line here are now higher than our entire defense budget. That and our government spending in orange is already way higher than its tax revenue shown in green. So this $3 trillion will basically push these lines even further apart. This seems really irresponsible, but Trump's counter argument is that these tax cuts will grow the economy by a lot, like by 5%, which gives us more money to pay off this debt. On the other hand, independent research firms don't think we will grow the economy by 5%, and most think it'll be near 0.5% to 1%. And historically, Bush has said the same thing for his own tax cuts. But there's limited data to show that the math actually worked out like that. So hopefully this 4-minute video gave you a better understanding.
The CBO's projection that as many as 12 million Americans could lose Medicaid coverage because of this law. What is the NEC's estimate for how many people could lose coverage?
Well, yeah, let's unbundle that a little bit, because first on the CBO coverage, so what are we doing? So what we're doing is we're asking for a work requirement, but the work requirement is that you need to be looking for work or even doing volunteer work, and you don't need to do it until your kids are 14 or older. And so the idea that that's going to cause a massive hemorrhaging in availability of insurance doesn't make a lot of sense to us. And then if you look at the CBO numbers, if you look at the big numbers, they say that people are going to lose insurance. About 5 million of those are people who have other insurance. There are people who have 2 types of insurance, and so therefore, if they lose one, they're still insured. And so the CBO numbers on that side don't make any sense to us at all. But on the other side, go back to 2017 when we had work requirements for Obamacare, and they said that we'd lose about 4 million insured between 2017 and 2019, and about double that over the next 10 years. And in fact, the number of insured went up quite a bit, by more than 10 million over those 2 years. The bottom line is the
President Trump had issued some statements throughout this process saying and urging, insisting that this bill does not cut Medicaid. He's also said some things, he says he doesn't think I'm too much of a smart person. This bill is a deal with the devil. President Trump, You're either being lied to or you are lying to the American people. Because this bill represents, in the text of this bill, the largest and greatest loss of health care in American history. 17 million Americans will lose their health care on this bill, not undocumented people, not quote unquote the disgusting term illegal, but 17 million Americans will have their health care cut from this bill. On this point of tax on tips, as one of the only people in this body who has lived off of tips, I want to tell you a little bit about the scam of that text, a little bit of the fine print there. The cap on that is $25,000. While you're jacking up taxes on people who make less than $50,000 across the United States, while taking away their SNAP, while taking away their Medicaid, while kicking them off of the ACA and their health care extensions. So if you're at home and you're living off tips, you do the math. Is that worth it to you? Losing all your health care, not able to feed your babies, not being able to put a diaper on their bottom in exchange for what? This bill is a deal with the devil. It explodes our national debt. It militarizes our entire economy, and it strips away health care and basic dignity of the American people. For what? To give Elon Musk a tax break and billionaires the greedy taking of our nation. We cannot stand for it, and we will not support it. You should be ashamed.
This has been the worst process of the worst bill I have ever seen during my decade in Congress.
Here are 6 heated moments from Congress debating Trump's big, beautiful bill.
Well, here we are again. As Yogi Berra once said, it's deja vu all over again. Debating this bill in the middle of the night. Boy, this crowd must love prime time in Guam. This has been the worst process of the worst bill I have ever seen during my decade in Congress. This is not what our founders intended, far from it. And while the process stinks, the substance is even worse. The bill still kicks 17 million Americans off their health care. Record cuts to Medicaid, record cuts to the Affordable Care Act, record cuts to Medicare.
They are very disappointed that they were not able to communicate with their representatives because their representatives were hiding from them because they could not justify their support of this big, disgusting billionaire bailout. I encourage my colleagues from New Jersey to listen to their constituents and vote no. And may God forgive those who do not do for the least among us. I yield back.
Judging by the narrow votes, we've pushed this bill about as far toward perfection as our process allows. The proof is not in the debate points scored today, but rather next year when Americans will ask themselves if they're better off. I believe because of this bill, the answer will be a resounding yes. And perhaps that's what the Democrats fear most. I yield back.
You should be ashamed of yourselves to mock spending on education. The best dollar we spend is on educating American people and the investments in scientific research, the biblical power to cure that science provides for us, cut in this bill, to spend $5 trillion for the wealthiest people in America.
How could the other side possibly vote against that? But Mr. Speaker, they are. And maybe a focus group told them that if they curse enough and if they say billionaires enough, those families will forget what's actually happening. But they're not going to forget because they're paying attention. You know what the average pay for a worker in America who makes tip money is under this bill? $32,000 a year. That's right. Billionaires aren't even allowed to be eligible for that tax break.
3:35 in the morning, a favorite time of Republicans for taking up this bill, we consider a travesty. The Senate took an ugly bill, went out and whipped it with an ugly stick, made it even uglier. 17 million Americans going without health insurance.
This bill is a deal with the devil.
All right, somebody got something to say. Go ahead. All right, he's supposed to say it's time to talk about the big beautiful bill, but it didn't work out that way. This is part 3. If you guys did not see part 2 or part...
Happy 4th of July. Let's go through 9 things about the big, beautiful tax bill that you need to know, politics aside. These charts we are using, this side is going to be the old stuff, this side is going to be the new bill, just so you know. The first 2, we are going to have different deductions for 2025. For a single filer, $15,750. For a married filing jointly, $31,500. If you are 65 or older, you get a bonus deduction of $7,600, which is up way big from $1,600 prior before this tax bill. Coming in at number 3, we have a bigger child tax credit of $2,200. Tax credits are huge because that's directly offsetting whatever tax you owe, and then $1,700 of it is refundable if you don't owe that much. Then if you are giving away part of your estate, we have now $15 million to give away, or $30 if we are married filing jointly. So hey, we're giving away that much money, sweet. And then this one is a really important one, tax on tips. We had no legislation to this prior. Now you can deduct $25,000 of your taxable earnings, but there is some income limitations to that. Here are those limitations. If you're single and make more than $150,000, or if you're married and make more than $300,000, then this deduction on tip income would not qualify for you. But hey, you're doing pretty well if you're making that much. Coming in at tip number 6, similar to the tip income, we have overtime pay where you can deduct $12,500 of your earnings and have it be tax-free. Again, we had nothing here before, but there's income limitations again. These income limitations are the same thing, $150,000 if you're single, or $300,000 if you're a joint filer. You can also see that you can deduct $25,000 for married couples on the overtime side, which you can double that $12,500. Tip number 7, you can now deduct up to $10,000 of interest on new loans, auto loans from 2025 to 2028. We had nothing on this before. It's not as good as it seems. I'm gonna show you that in a second here. If your income is above $100,000 if you're single, or $200,000 if you're married, you can't take this deduction, and the cars must be assembled in the US. So this is a pro-US thing to be able to deduct that interest on the auto loan you might have. Coming in at tip number 8, we have now this new child savings if you're born between 2025 and 2028. So probably not you, but there is a one-time $1,000 credit going to these individuals born that's going to be invested, which is actually pretty sweet. It's basically like a jump start to investing for individuals, and it's going to be in a diversified US stock index fund. Employees can also contribute to this, or employers. So there is some additional stuff if you are a family person that can help you here. Final tip number 9, we have some charity stuff here. You can deduct your income by $1,000 or $2,000 depending if you're single or married filing jointly. Most people take the standard deduction, so this is good for them because they can reduce their income if they're charitably inclined. And on the 4th of July, that is 9 things about the beautiful tax bill that you need to know about or should be aware of. I don't care about your politics. You don't care about my politics. I just
How the Big Beautiful Bill could impact your income. For context, as of July 4th, the Big Beautiful Bill has been officially signed into law. That said, I think it's important for you as an American to understand how it will actually impact your income. This income projection data comes from the Penn Wharton budget model, which was updated on July 1st. They projected out the average change in after-tax or transfer income for income year 2027 for Americans. Transfer income would be benefit from things like social programs, which is why we see a negative effect on those in the lower income quintiles. They split this data by income quintile, which is just a fancy way to say by 20% brackets. I'll be sharing the associated salaries for each of those brackets for a more relevant comparison. This is an update on the video that I previously published based on data that I had on 5/27. Before we dive into the actual data, make sure to hit that follow button. But starting off, those making $0 to $18,000 a year, they will see negative $165 a year, or minus 1.1% benefit. For those making $18,000 to $53,000 a year, they'll see a $30 benefit, or 0.1%. For those making $53,000 to $96,000 a year, they'll see a $1,430 benefit, or plus 1.8%. For those making $96,000 to $179,000 a year, they'll see a net benefit of $3,955, or plus 2.9%. For those in the last income quintile, it's split into more granular sections. But to start off, $179,000 to $272,000 a year, they'll see a benefit of $6,690, or plus 3.1%. If we go all the way to the top, those making
the salaries in the 0.1%, so that would be income above $4,451,000 a year. They would see a benefit of $301,500. How the big beautiful bill could impact your income. For context,
Happy 4th of July. Let's go through 9.
All right, so we're back for part 2 of this big, beautiful bill. I'm so tired of reading this shit, actually, but I sacrificed myself for the benefit of the people. This is part 2. Let's get going. We're gonna have the timestamps to show what sections you can skim to if you're interested in a different section over another. And the titles that we're going to be covering today are energy and natural resources, environment and public works, and taxes and finance. Now, before we get started, you guys know the rules. Follow, like, share, send it to one of these people that can be telling you to read the bill, but they ain't read the bill themselves. Let's begin. For the energy and natural gas section, Donald Trump is putting forward a policy that's going to see a massive expansion of fossil fuel. This includes reinstating quarterly lease sales to federal lands for gas and oil, basically undoing what Joe Biden did during his presidency. He's going to expand drilling in Alaska's national petroleum reserves. He's going to remove the methane emission fees that were associated with venting and gas flaring. Alaska's development is going to be boosted. They're going to go from getting 50% of revenue sharing from the leasing of these petroleum reserves to now getting 70%. And they also are going to have a lot of their restrictions lifted. Now, this bill for the coal industry, it mandates 4 million acres of land to be used for coal producers. And some of this land is previously federal land that was under review for environmental dangers. So it drops the Fed royalty rate for coal leasing, and it also refunds the difference that they paid in previous royalty structures. I want to touch on the coal section real quick. A lot of these changes may seem insignificant, but the reality is a lot of these contracts for coal leasing could be for 20 to 30 years in duration. And for an industry that's ineffective, it doesn't produce that much electricity, but it has a lot of harm on our environment. I'm not sure why we're going this direction, but hey, coal currently accounts for about 16% of all the U.S. electricity that's generated. And it's a dying industry, not just because it's not as useful, but because there's not a lot of jobs out there either. Moving on to the next section is forestry and timber. BLM, which is the Board of Land Management, not that one group we know of, okay? There are some new mandates to increase production and overall productivity. It also doubles.
The big, beautiful bill just became law, and here's 5 key takeaways for the everyday American. Okay, tax breaks. There will be new deductions allowed for tips and overtime.
The big beautiful bill has increased child tax credits, and it has bigger incentives for employers to sponsor childcare. And we're going to get into the economics of all this by using a family of 4 as our guide and example. And if you're new here, my name is Gaisha. I'm a corporately trained economist with a master's degree in economics. And without further ado, get your tea ready. We're going to hop right into it. So let's start with the numbers. The child tax credit increased to $2,200. So that means that for the family of 4, we have Keisha and John here, and their 2 little ones. They would now receive $4,400 on their tax returns if they owe taxes. However, if they do not owe taxes, they will only receive $1,700 per child. Meanwhile, employers who decide to build child care facilities for their employees, or if they decide to refer them out to other child care facilities, they can actually claim upwards of $500,000 to $600,000 in tax credits. So this means that if Keisha and John are 2 working parents, they can either subsidize their child care through their employer, or they can be subject to upwards of $30,000 in child care costs, because the average daycare cost for children right now is between $6,000 to around $15,000 on the higher end. Parents, y'all know. And this is reflective of how U.S. policy tends to work, where incentives are given via tax credits for relief, and it is scaled once you have business support. And to paint this picture a little bit more clearer, if John or Keisha happen to work for a startup or another small business, they probably won't have access to these daycare incentives provided by a larger company. And this is primarily because the United States relies more on the private market in order to fuel production. But if Keisha and John lived in places such as France, which gives a monthly allowance to families who have children, or Germany, who guarantees public child care for all, this whole conversation wouldn't even be a thing because it is all free and incentivized. So for John and Keisha and families that are larger or smaller, the numbers matter, but so does the system behind them. So whether this policy expands or widens the gap, this will be totally contingent upon employer participation and how well these benefits reach the families that need them most. Because as we all know, childcare is increasing year by year. And with that being said, if you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and let's go to part 3, where we're going to be discussing the implications of the new SNAP and Medicaid requirements in this new big, beautiful bill. And with that being said, I hope you all have a lovely night, and I hope that you're... So the Big Beautiful Bill has officially turned your safety nets into a surveillance system. And we are going to get into all the nitty-gritty details as to why your SNAP and Medicaid benefits has now come with more tracking and less support. And in case you're new here, my name is Gaisha, and I'm a corporately trained economist with a master's degree in economics. And without further ado, we are going to sip some tea and dive right into these details. So under the new Big Beautiful Bill that was just signed into law by President Trump, if you are on either SNAP or Medicaid and you are between the ages of 19 to 64 years old, you are now required to work at least 80 hours a week. And mind you, with work, they define this as either volunteering for community service or if you're doing like a formal job. And as you all know, we've seen the patterns before where you police the poor and then you prioritize the profitable. We saw it with the 1996 welfare reform, and we saw it again after COVID-19, where states removed millions from Medicaid. But now it is federal and much larger. And supporters of this particular federal measure say that it encourages work. But here is the tea. Most people on SNAP already work, but they may be burdened by financial instability or either jobs that just do not pay enough to live. So therefore, if you are a caregiver, shift worker, or you're a part of the gig economy, and if you happen to have either SNAP or Medicaid benefits, you should prepare to be living in red tape. But outside of preparation, let's discuss what is going to be the aftermath once these things go into effect, which will lead to more people being uninsured, more children will be in food insecure homes, and as well as more people resorting to hospitals as last resort care. And I say this because these numbers are up there, where $863 billion has been cut from Medicaid, $295 billion has been cut from SNAP. And let me be clear, this is not fiscal responsibility. This is the largest rollback of modern social safety nets in history, and that is being backed by compliance. That being said, stay tuned for part 4. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, or if you did not like this breakdown, that's fine as well. Be sure to like, follow, comment, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts below. And let's start some dialogue as always. And you all have a wonderful day. Quick correction time. I wanted to come on here and correct something in which I misspoke about, which is saying 80 hours per The Big Beautiful Bill has increased child tax credits and
Y'all know I wasn't gonna let the night end without telling y'all about the Big Beautiful Bill with points that I found interesting. So if you want details or if you want to know about something else that I didn't cover, you can go to whitehouse.gov, you can go to Google, you can go to hell. I don't care, just leave me alone about it, okay? So listen up, see if some of this can work for you. HR 6585, the Workforce Pell Grant. That's 8 to 15 weeks or 150 to 600 clock hours. You can qualify for a Workforce Pell Grant. Basically, trade school and programs, training programs. So if you've always wanted to go to HVAC repair or plumbing or some kind of trade school to get yourself a job in a certain field, now you may qualify for a Workforce Pell Grant. So that's wonderful. Use that to your advantage, okay? ATC overhaul, that's the air traffic control overhaul. $12.5 billion reconciliation package for the revitalization of the air traffic control program. Okay. When y'all were talking about he wanted to dismantle and get rid of air traffic control, yeah, he was just really trying to dismantle it to build it back up, which is kind of what we told you, but y'all kind of wanted to listen to the fear-mongering. American credit unions, no new tax added on 142 million members of American credit unions. HR 1, that's more financial freedom for you, right? That's great. American Farm Bureau, they have a reconciliation package and huge tax provisions. So for the people that were saying that Big Beautiful Bill is going to hurt farmers, absolutely not. It's actually going to help them. So I hope y'all got some fast tax preparers ready because it's on ready, set, go for a lot of people. Delivering school choice, federal funding for private school tuition, tutoring, and expenses. And that's through tax credit to donors to scholarship granting organizations. So basically, there are tax credits to people who have the money that want to donate to scholarship organizations, so your child can have more choices in their education when it comes to public school or private school. They can qualify for a scholarship for private school, so that's amazing. Social Security, super enhanced deductions for our seniors that are receiving Social Security. So again, get your ass a fast tax preparer, okay? That knows the ropes. No cuts to Medicaid. They only removed illegal aliens, so there are no cuts to Medicaid for American citizens. No changes for pregnant women, children, seniors, the disabled, or low-income families. So all the fear-mongering that they did telling you that a lot of people are going to be kicked off of Medicaid, yeah, it was just one big lie. There's no changes for American citizens that are on Medicaid. Medicare, there was never any danger of Medicare leaving it ever. So it's not going to be touched. It was never in danger of being touched. Expanding rural hospital protection. You know the rumor they said where they're going to be closing rural hospitals because they're cutting out Medicaid? That's so untrue. They're only cutting out Medicaid for illegal aliens. So the money that they're saving, they're actually investing it more into rural hospitals. The 20-hour work week requirement, that's for able-bodied adults without young children, ages 18 to 65. If you can get out there and work, in order for you to receive some of these government benefits, your ass is going to have to go to work for 20 hours a week. That's 8 hours a month. That's not going to hurt you. 100% expensing for new domestic factories. So that's more job opportunities for Americans, right? Right, okay. Maybe we won't go all the way back to the golden era, but we're getting as close to it as we possibly can. So use some of those things that you can to your advantage, and the Big Beautiful Bill is going to work for us. Any more questions? Go to whitehouse.gov or just go and read the
10 things I hate about the Big Beautiful Bill Act that very unfortunately passed Senate today. And here's what it means for the normal American person. First, 11 million people will most likely be cut from Medicaid. Second, grad school, medical school, dental school, law school, all capped at $150,000 in loans. That's all you get. So if you're not rich, you don't get to make those professional degrees part of your upward mobility. Not an option for you. 3, tax breaks for the rich. The top 1% will save thousands in tax breaks. while someone making $80,000 a year may save a couple of hundred. 4, hospitals will be getting less funding from Medicaid. The reimbursement will be lower, which means less money to the hospitals paying for care, which means longer wait times, less staff, and overall a worse experience for all of our patients. This will especially affect the rural hospitals and those safety nets who take a lot of patients without insurance and who really depend on Medicaid reimbursement. And if that's not worse, let's look at number 5. 1 in 4 children who benefit from SNAP benefits and food stamps, yeah, they're going to be cut. 1 in 4 children. We're taking food from children. 6, Medicaid bans for abortion and gender affirming care. So if you have private insurance, if you can afford that, that's fine. You can go ahead and get those treatments, but poor people will not be able to. So you're going to have that baby, and then you're not going to be able to get the food stamps for it, and you're not going to be able to get the Medicaid insurance. So that's what we're doing. Those on the Affordable Care Act, those who have Obamacare or whatever you want to call it, yeah, that's getting more expensive too, and harder to get. Number 8, more red tape for the poor. So people are going to have to reapply and do more paperwork regularly for Medicaid. However, those who are rich get tax breaks with no extra work, or at very least minimal extra work for their tax person. Number 9, not only are hospitals getting less funding from Medicaid, but so are individual providers, once again making them less likely to want to take the insurance from Medicaid patients, meaning that they will have less access to health care. Once again, hurting anyone who is not rich. And my favorite, number 10, it adds $3.3 trillion to America's debt. This isn't saving us money, it's adding to our debt. You're cutting money from poor people and you're giving it to the rich and you're adding to the overall deficit. So if you stuck around for this whole video, this is the time to act. The bill now goes to the House.
I have downloaded on my computer the Big Beautiful Bill, all 870 pages of it as signed into law on July 4th by President.
Wait, you don't know what the Big Beautiful Bill actually does to education? Let me break down the 3 things that...
Watch this and go to the comments and let me know what you think. It's a great example of what happens when you don't do your homework and have 0.
Y'all hit the like and subscribe button.
Don't get
Thank y'all for watching.